Welcome back to the Adventures of Chris and Mike. In this episode, we're going to be visiting the Historic Fort Meade Museum in Sturgis, South Dakota. Join us now as my good friend Chuck Rambo takes us on a tour of the Historic Fort Meade Museum.
Unfortunately, in 1906, it looked as if there might be another Wounded Knee developing. Feelings had become very, very strong on the Ute reservation. There was a little bit of controversy, and the Ute Indians, fearing that perhaps an excuse might be found to do them some damage, they fled from the Ute reservation coming north. Exactly what their plans were, we're not too sure, because they weren't too sure. They were just leaving that area of the reservation where there might be conflict. They fled north with somewhere around 400 or so people, men, women, children. They came up into Wyoming. There the 8th Cavalry made contact with them, and they were brought by the 8th Cavalry to Fort Meade. They were allowed to use the land to the south, just across from where the National Cemetery is located today, as their camping area. For a short time in 1907, they went to the Cheyenne River Reservation. They were a short people, somewhat darker complected than the Sioux Indians. The Sioux considered them to be somewhat inferior. Number one, they were too closely associated with the government. Number two, they were short and they were dark. And the Sioux Indians, the Plains people, considered themselves the superior people. So the Utes did not get on too well with the Sioux. They were brought back to Fort Meade and remained here on site until mid-1908, when they were loaded aboard the railroad and taken back to Utah. They had agreed that perhaps the time was right for them to go back home. This last summer, 2002, had a very, very interesting experience when a Ute woman from Fort Defiance, Utah, the headquarters of the Ute down there at the time of the Ute flight, arrived here at the post. She was trying to find out a little bit about her grandfather. Her grandfather had been a youngster at the time of the flight of the Ute Indians, 1906 to 1908. And she mentioned that her grandfather had been here. She didn't know for sure where. And I asked if he was a part of the Ute flight, and she said yes, that was the group that had come up. She said, we were planning to come here to Fort Meade to find out what we could. But as we were traveling past that National Cemetery, we saw there was a picnic area down by that little chapel. And so my daughter said, maybe that would be a good place for us to go and have a lunch. So we drove down there. When we got down there, my daughter was setting up some of the picnic food, and a cow came walking across that picnic area. And the cow stopped and looked directly at me, and my daughter said, Mom, I think that cow is trying to get your attention. And that cow then walked up on the slope of the hill and went down over the hill into a little valley. I followed it the whole way, and that was a beautiful, beautiful valley. She didn't know that that area down there was where the Utes had camped, 1906 to 1908. She didn't know that that little valley the cow had led her to was where the Utes who had died through that period of time had been buried. That is yet referred to as the Ute burial area.
Stay tuned for more episodes of The Adventures of Chris and Mike as we continue our tour with Chuck Rambo at the Historic Fort Meade Museum. And please subscribe to my channel.